Hello, salam. Thank you so much for clicking onto this video. I hope that you are well, inshallah. So I'm going to be talking about some tips for fasting for Ramadan. So I assume you have clicked onto this video because maybe this is your first Ramadan and you are wondering, how am I going to fast from dawn break to sunset without any food or water for a whole month? Now, this was definitely how I felt before I approached my first Ramadan, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in the last few years of fasting. But I do just want to say this is a video for how to fast for Ramadan as a Muslim. It is not a video about like intermittent fasting, which I am very interested in. I listen to quite a few podcasts about, but this is not the topic of this video. But perhaps you are preparing yourself for your first Ramadan, or you do want to just fast this Ramadan, or a day or two here and there, along with a friend or a colleague or a community of Muslims that you live near. So just to give you a bit of background on me and where this video is coming from in terms of my experience, my name is Ellie. I became Muslim in 2020 in August. So I've been Muslim for 2.5 years now. But this is going to be my fourth Ramadan because I actually fasted during Ramadan in 2020. When we were in lockdown, I was in Indonesia at the time, which is, a Muslim country. I was on an Islamic island. I was learning about Islam at the time. So I figured, why not try and fast? And then since then, obviously, I've fasted for 2021, 2022, and now this is going to be my fourth in 2023. Now, before we go into my 10 tips for fasting, I guess I just want to say first, especially if this is your first Ramadan or your first Ramadan fasting fully and you are nervous, is that Ramadan is such a special time of year. And things like fasting that you will find hard and Muslims find hard during the rest of the year, even though some people do still fast once or twice a week, it just becomes so much easier in Ramadan. Ramadan is seriously the most spiritual and special time of the year. And when people who don't understand fasting will often hear that Muslims fast, from food and water, from not even sunrise, from dawn break to sunset, they think, how can you do it? But as a Muslim, you really look forward to Ramadan, and a lot of people think that it must be so hard, it must be so awful, but it's like, why do Muslims look forward to Ramadan so much if it is that hard and awful? Because it is really, really not. It is so beautiful. And obviously there are so many different aspects to Ramadan as well as fasting. There are some people who cannot fast for medical reasons. So Ramadan isn't all about fasting. There are many different aspects to it that make it so spiritual and beautiful, but somehow during Ramadan fasting just becomes so much easier. It is literally insane. So please keep that in mind if you are new to fasting and watching this. So my first tip is to just ease into fasting. So I'm going to talk to you as if you are a new Muslim, you haven't fasted before, or maybe you are a born Muslim, but you are just kind of starting fasting. Maybe you're a teenager or you're in an older part of life and you haven't fasted as much in the past. It is unrealistic to expect yourself to fast, like I said, from water and from food, from dawn break to sunset. It is unrealistic to go from 0 to 100 of doing it. Now, for me on my first Ramadan, obviously I wasn't actually Muslim, but I'm still so glad I took this approach, and I still recommend this to everyone as well, is to just ease yourself into it. So for me, because I was in Indonesia, it was very hot. I was worried about the lack of water, and I usually do drink a lot of water. So I still let myself drink water for the first kind of 2 weeks of Ramadan. I fasted from food, and slowly as those weeks went on, I started drinking less and less, and I tried not to drink it unless I absolutely felt like I needed it, and that need got lower and lower. Before then, when I did the last 10 days of Ramadan without water, I was absolutely fine. But I think sometimes, especially the water issue, can be really, really worrying and unnerving for people, especially if you drink a lot of water and usually, or you've got an active job and lifestyle, you're like, how am I going to survive without water? So if you are new to fasting, then don't let yourself drink water if you think you need it. And I think more it's a mental thing. You need to mentally let yourself know that you are okay without water. So just have sips here and there, and then slowly you can reduce it. Another way to break yourself into fasting is to do half days or to do every other day. I would more recommend probably half days, because I think every other day, then you might have a coffee in between, and then I'll get onto caffeine later, and then that could kind of diminish your progress then for the next few days in Ramadan. But just start with half days days, especially if you've got a busy job, get up for suhoor and then give yourself a time, maybe 2 o'clock, a couple of hours before iftar, to break your fast, and then just go back to eating and drinking, and maybe just try and keep that eating and drinking again minimal, but you can do if you want. And then again, you increase that time slowly before it gets to iftar, you know, inshallah by the end of the month. But there is no expectation on you, especially either if you aren't Muslim or if you are a new Muslim or you are just new to fasting, that you should be fasting all of the time, because it is unrealistic, and the last thing you want to do is just have a bad experience and just hate fasting, because that is not what it's about. And you have to remember as well that the majority of Muslims have been fasting since they were like 10 years old. Not all of them, of course, depending on family situations, how practicing they were, but the majority of Muslims fasting since they were a child, and you cannot expect yourself, I assume you're an adult or maybe you're a teenager watching this, to do what other people around you do when they've had so many more years experience. So tip 2 does relate to caffeine. So it is a good idea to wean off caffeine, or if you do eat a lot of sugar, then excessive sugar before Ramadan starts. Now I say this because withdrawal caffeine induced headaches are a real thing. Same when it comes to sugar. I know when I first started fasting, a lot of people told me at the start, you know, the headaches, they probably are just due to caffeine withdrawals, and I hadn't thought about that. So now before Ramadan, I do try and prep myself to wean off caffeine before, which I definitely do suggest to you as one of the tips for fasting. And talking about Ramadan preparations, I do have a video before this with 8 ways that you can prep for Ramadan, and that is one of them. But I more say this as well because perhaps you're watching this the day before Ramadan and you haven't been able to wean off caffeine. Those headaches that you're going to get at the start are generally just short term. So the first few days of Ramadan can be really hard for people because of sugar and caffeine withdrawals, but they don't carry on generally for people throughout Ramadan, because then your body gets used to it. So if you can wean off it before, then do. If not, then just push through it cold turkey for a few days, and then those will get better. The third tip is to take some painkillers at suhoor, because obviously even if you get a headache, then when you're fasting, you can't take the painkillers, because then you are having something in your body, but also then you usually take painkillers with water, right? So that is the point there, is that you can't then drink the water to take the painkillers. So I had it recommended to me, and this is something that I do, especially at the start of Ramadan. I don't do it later on really, unless I am feeling like under the weather, but it's just to take 2 Panadol, painkillers, whatever, with suhoor, and then that just gives you a few buffer hours when a headache may come on early morning, especially if you usually have an early morning coffee or tea, and the painkillers will just help ease that headache a little bit. And again, that will go, but the worst thing is to start Ramadan with headaches, because then you just feel like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be so hard for the month. You know, when I think of myself, the start of Ramadan, when it is hard of lack of sleep and you're getting used to fasting and everything, then compared to the end of Ramadan, where I'm just living my normal life by the end of Ramadan, and you know, it's like, even right now, I can't imagine that, but I know I've done it 3 times already, so I know that will happen. But yeah, if you're struggling, like if you're worried about fasting, the last thing you want is excessive headaches at the start, because it's just going to put you off. Another tip for suhoor is to not drink too much water. So I know it's obviously really easy to think, okay, when you're having your suhoor, you're eating before you're going to start pray fajr. You want to eat and you want to have as much kind of liquid as you can to then sustain you for the day. But if I drink too much water, I just go back to bed, and there's a tip on this by going back to bed after this video, after this point. I'm feeling so bloated, and so it feels counterintuitive to say don't drink too much water, but you then will likely, or if you feel like me anyway, feel bad in those next few hours again after suhoor, which is what you don't want. So it's nice to drink a good amount of water, hydrate yourself, but don't kind of force yourself to drink liters and liters of water, because I think you will feel worse for it. I know I do afterwards, and that's a tip that I'd never thought about, so that's why I'm sharing it here, because that was something that I definitely learned through trial and error. Also, on the term of suhoor, do plan to mix up your suhoor options during the month of Ramadan. I am personally someone who can eat the same kind of thing every day, especially for breakfast, but when it comes to suhoor, I just can't. I eat a certain meal, maybe it's like cereal or something for the first few days, and then I literally feel like I'm going to be sick eating it after a few days, and then I'll maybe go on to something else like bagels and eggs or toast and eggs. And then after that, I'm like, oh, this makes me feel sick. And then towards the end of Ramadan, I usually go on to like smoothies because your stomach does shrink. So at the start, you'll probably want to eat quite a lot of suhoor, but over the course of the month, you will just not need as much. And if you're still forcing yourself to eat like a big portion at the end of the month, then your body's probably just like, can't take this. I think it's because you're eating so early in the morning. So definitely plan a few different options, keep it mixed up. If you feel like you can't stomach something anymore, then change it. There is nothing wrong in that. And I just want to tell you, it is very normal to feel like you're over food within a couple of days when perhaps normally you could just eat the same thing for breakfast every day. Okay, now touching on iftar, which you're going to break your fast with, it is really important to not have too much salt or have overly salty food for iftar because you will feel it the next day. I remember on my first Ramadan, I lived in Indonesia, and once I had a pizza takeout, and the next day, oh my gosh, I was just struggling so much for water. I guess I was still drinking water at this point actually, but I remember thinking like, do not do this again later on in Ramadan because you're gonna find it so hard. So definitely keep those healthy, fresh meals for iftar. And I do like having a healthy approach to Ramadan because I think that you're already fasting, which is so good for your body. So the last thing you want to do is fill it with junk when you can finally eat. It is nice to think about a whole healthy month, but also in terms of just practicalities, if you do eat a lot of junk in the evening, you probably are going to feel worse for it the next day because you're going to be much more thirsty, you're going to be much more lethargic, waking up for suhoor. So all of these things just add on, and it's definitely worth keeping in mind when you are fasting. Coconut water and dates are an absolute lifesaver for me anyway. I mean, it is sunnah to break your fast with dates because they are just so nutritious and so delicious after a day of fasting. I do often try and eat some dates in the morning as well. Again, they're really good for energy and just nutrition. Coconut water as well is so good to kind of hydrate you more than what water would. And again, going back to my last point about staying healthy, you know, staying away from kind of fizzy drinks, things like that aren't really going to hydrate you. You really want to focus on food. You've got such a small window where you can fit in the food and the liquid, and you want that to be kind of nutritious, healthy, and to actually benefit you then the next day fasting. So dates and coconut water for me are a must anyway. Now, it is recommended by a lot of scholars and even, you know, all the people who wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get up early. We all know generally that getting up early is good for us, but it is definitely hard. And scholars will say, you know, once you've woken up for Fajr, and obviously in this instance, you know, you've woken up for suhoor and then you've prayed Fajr, is to not go back to sleep. But in reality, that can be much harder, especially if you have got children or you've then got a job to go to or you're working all day. So for me, I do find it very hard during Ramadan to get back to sleep. That time where you've just eaten your suhoor, you prayed Fajr, and then you get back into bed. And especially if you've only got a short amount of time, like an hour and a half, but if you stay awake for an hour and a half, it's going to really impact your day. But it's not enough to get a really good sleep again. But I do want to say that it does, for me at least, get easier. So one of the tips I shared in my preparations for Ramadan video is that if you're not used to getting up for Fajr already, then try and get up for Fajr, because that's going to get your body used to waking up early in the morning, then needing to go back to sleep. But of course, when I pray Fajr, I just like keep all the lights off, go into the bathroom, do wudu, pray, go back into bed. Whereas obviously suhoor, you're going downstairs, you're turning lights on, you're cooking, you're eating dates that are giving you nutrition and energy, and then you're trying to expect your body to sleep after that. But it does get easier. It is very hard at the start, but it does get easier. And if you're in the UK, Fajr gets earlier and earlier, which means generally the time that then you can go back to sleep for gets longer and longer, which also makes it easier. So that's just a tip to tell you that if you struggle, a lot of people struggle, and it will get easier, inshallah. Now, my last 2 points are kind of related. The first one is that fasting is not meant to make you ill. You're supposed to fast if you have a healthy body and you can cope with fasting. There are a lot of people who don't fast during Ramadan. They've been advised by their doctors not to fast, especially if they have diabetes. And there are other reasons why people can't fast. I'm not too sure of them myself, but if you've been told by a doctor you can't fast, then you shouldn't be fasting, especially if it's a Muslim doctor and you've researched into it, because you're not supposed to be fasting when you're ill, and it's not supposed to make you ill. So if you are really struggling with fasting, then it is definitely worth speaking to a doctor, especially a Muslim doctor as well. I think if you go to a general doctor who's not Muslim, they're not really going to understand. And then the last point on that kind of note is that it's also not supposed to be really easy. My husband often reminds me of this during Ramadan. When you do get, especially to the midpoint of Ramadan, and you're hungry and you're just craving food and you're missing going out, with friends for brunch or a coffee and things like that. He's like, Ramadan isn't supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be so hard that it makes you ill, which is why I've just made that point before, the last point, but it's not supposed to be a walk in the park. Like, as much as I said at the start, Ramadan is such a beautiful, special month. And the reason why it is so special, I think, is because it gives us discipline during that month. And it really shows you that, if you can give up food and drink for all day for a month, like, you can do anything. And there's so many reasons as to why fasting is so good. It is that discipline. It is so good to just give our body a break from like digesting food all of the time. And that's why when I became Muslim, I was very into intermittent fasting, read a lot about it. And then when I realized like, oh wow, it's the same thing, I was like, wow, that is really incredible. And some people will say it's good to fast to kind of learn how people without food, survive and how they feel. A lot of Muslims describe Ramadan like to non-Muslims, like, why are you doing it? Oh, it's to help so we know what the poor feel. That isn't the reason of Ramadan, but it is one of the components, just to make yourself kind of withdraw from things that we are addicted to, realize how lucky we are to have so much access to food and drink normally. So there's so many reasons, but I just want to end on the fact that, yeah, Ramadan is not supposed to make you ill, but it is not supposed to be so easy that it is a breeze in the park. It is supposed to challenge you, and it is supposed to be hard at times. So if you are feeling it hard, then then work out what is it that you're feeling hard. If it's the headaches at the start, then just push through it, and I'm sure that they will go. If you really need to cut down your hours of fasting, drink some water in between just to ease into it, then do that. And then you can do things like I said, kind of making sure that your meals are healthy, and of course making sure that you sleep well. Maybe I should do this as 11 points. My 11th point is to make sure that you nap. Count naps into your days, because napping during Ramadan is just so nice. So I'm going to end this video here with 10 plus 1 tips for fasting for Ramadan. I hope that you have enjoyed it. Please do let me know in the comments if you have. I'm gonna hopefully make a few more videos for Ramadan preparation, and then also make a few videos during Ramadan, inshallah. If you don't follow me on Instagram, my handle is here. It is @_eQuinn, and that's kind of where I share everything live. I do often post things quite late on YouTube. I have got so many more videos on my channel from fasting, from all of my travels, from becoming Muslim. So if you have got time, make sure you do check those out as well. And I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope that you have a beautiful Ramadan, inshallah.